as we navigate this incredibly important and transformative period, Mooji's famous words come to mind. Step into the fire of self-discovery. This fire will not burn you. It will only burn what you are not. Hi folks, welcome back to Undefined Life. It's Tash here. So I wanted to hop on and share a little bit of an energy update and perhaps validate some of what you've been experiencing or feeling, and also just share my thoughts and perspective on the current juncture that we are being faced with as a humanity, and probably at a personal level, individual level too. So I'm currently filming this in the middle of Scorpio season, mid-November in 2021, but this is a timeless message speaking to the process of death and rebirth, of transformation, of which Scorpio is indeed an expert. And that's really what we are being faced with during what feels like the most energetically potent time of the year for me. My previous video was me documenting my personal experience of this time and some of the wounding that it's bringing up for me. This time that we're in at the moment, and I'm not really speaking specifically to Scorpio season, I'm talking about the transition that humanity is going through at the moment. This time we're in is such a potent time for transformation. If we have the capacity and the ability to navigate it with awareness, with an awareness that what's dying or what feels like it's dying within us is not who we are. So I'm going to speak more about this death and rebirth process, because when you're on the spiritual path, when you're a light worker, an empath, a starseed, an awakened soul, you will be moving through many, many cycles of death and rebirth, hopefully more and more with awareness and consciousness as each cycle unfolds. Because that is the spiritual journey. It is the process of the egoic, fixed, separate self having to dissolve so that the soulful self, the God-centered self, can emerge. And I've really been receiving a lot of insight over the last couple of weeks that I felt would be perhaps helpful to share for anyone that's moving through this cycle of death and rebirth, whether it's now during Scorpio season or actually just at any point in your spiritual awakening. We have to remember and retain our connection to the divine, to God, to the higher source of power, to the universe, whatever semantic term that you have for that force. It's really important to keep our relationship to that force front and center of our journey. And what happens when we don't is that the egoic self, which is the self-identity, the labels, the stories, the narrative, the paradigms, the ideologies, these kind of fixed things that crystallize around our sense of self that we get really attached to. What happens when we don't keep the divine or the universe or God front and center is that egoic self tries to take the reins in a way that is over-controlling, in a way that is fiercely attached from a place of fear to the outcome of things in our lives, in a way that is deeply unwilling to follow the flow of the divine unfolding. So when we are really in a state of egoic contraction, we are not open to receiving all of the gifts, all of the insight, all of the opportunities that may want to flow to us. We're not open to receiving. We're fiercely in the over-controller mode of what is the wounded masculine. And therefore we are not making space for our soulful self to emerge, for our soulful heart-based desires to emerge. When we're acting from a place of ego, we're actually acting from a place of fear, because the ego is fear-based. The ego is intent on surviving, and the ego fears death the most, because the ego is attached to the physical body. When the physical body dies, the ego dies with it. And so it's intent on finding any means of surviving it can. And so anything that feels vaguely uncomfortable, like a relationship breaking down, like losing a job, like moving through the awakening process and having members of your family or your friendship groups or your peers, your colleagues, perhaps taking one route and you're taking another, and finding that you're diverging away from the people in your life and finding yourself maybe feeling more alienated, isolated, without community, feeling more like an outcast or an outsider. All of these experiences that we could perceive to be negative, the ego will resist them. And then when they happen, or as they happen, the ego will be so intent on trying to find something else to cling to attach to in its place. And what the death process, the dying process invites us to do is to sink into the void of the unknown, is to let those ideas and ideals and mental constructs and expectations and attachments to people or things or outcomes to fall away, to dissolve. And in that space is grace. In that space, we create the stillness, the spaciousness for the divine to come into our lives. We start moving away from this mode of being, of contraction. We let go and we are open to receiving. And that is where God, our faith in God, our faith in the universe, our faith in the divine comes in. Can we trust the death process enough to let go, to surrender into whatever needs to be released, so that we can create space for what is more aligned in our lives to emerge? And this takes a lot of courage, by the way, because we can, as humans in a physical reality, get very attached to our lives and our minds and the thoughts we have and the way we think things should be. And so when an aspect of ourselves, our egoic selves, or our reality dies, and that doesn't need to be physical death, although it can be, as I've said, a relationship breaking down. It can be something not working out the way you expected it to. The ego gets attached. And then when it doesn't work out, or when something challenging or painful emerges, we experience a grieving process, which is akin to death. And the ego is in resistance to that. It's in resistance to letting go, because its primary job is to hold on and survive. And so when an idea dies, or a person dies, or an experience dies, or a paradigm crumbles, part of the egoic self dies with it. And the gift and grace of this is that, as I've said, more of our soulful, luminous, God-centered self can come through, can emerge through. And that is the path we're on as light workers. That's what we're here to do. We are here to, as much as we can with awareness, allow ourselves to move through these cycles of death and rebirth, to stay anchored in the knowing that what's dying is not who we truly are, because the formless aspect of our existence, of our essence, never dies, is unchanging, is immovable, it never perishes, it's ever present, and it's love. That which we truly are is love. And so if we can begin to contact that spaciousness, that essence within us, and we can, with commitment to meditation, mindfulness, stillness, begin to more and more contact that space beyond the physical, we can allow a little bit of room for when something dies. We can allow some room for that grieving process. We can allow for the letting go. And then we can begin to step back, release the reins, say, I don't know. I don't know how this is supposed to go. It didn't go the way I planned. And allow for the divine, for the universe to step in with unexpected gifts, opportunities, with a new trajectory. Because ultimately, our path here as light workers is not to fulfill our egoic desires, is not to be motivated by egoic will, When we fill ourselves soulfully with the presence of the divine, of the universe, it's no longer the individual I that is moving through the world. We are filled with spirit. And that is really the point. Because when we are living, breathing, and speaking from our soulful self, from that God-connected, God-centered self, that is when we have the most impact. That is when we are of service. That is when we are fulfilling our soul mission. So the rebirth process is intrinsically linked to the death process. As one thing ends, it marks the beginning of something else. We may not know what that something else is as the thing that before it falls away. That's where trust comes in. That's where connection to the divine comes in. It's trusting that with every end, there is a beginning. And with awareness, that beginning can be more aligned for us. And we get the opportunity then, during these cycles of death and rebirth, to begin to assess, am I living the life that feels most aligned for me? Or am I living a life that mitigates fear, the fear that I'm still containing and holding on to and unwilling to feel and face? Am I truly being bold and courageous enough to follow my heartfelt desires? Or am I clinging to what's comfortable? Am I clinging to what's known? Am I holding on desperately to my attachments because I'm scared of the unknown and I'm scared of change? And really, it's not you, your essence, that's scared of change. It's your ego, which is natural, by the way. But you can still observe that and choose not to identify with that. You can choose for that to not be your reality. You can choose to allow that change to come in, even when it's painful. The gift of rebirth, after the death which precedes it, is getting to choose your highest potential, your most soulful embodiment, that which your heart most deeply desires. And remembering that your heartfelt desires were put there by God. And so actually not respecting those desires, not listening to those desires, not honoring those desires is to not honor God. So if you find yourself in this process right now, as I'm in also, you might find very, very painful emotions coming up with what feels like no reason. And the reason for that is at this particular moment, especially, although this is always the case with death and rebirth, we are moving through very old wounds. We are moving through so much density because many people are awakening not just to the multidimensionality of this existence and this reality, but also awakening to the fallacies and the lies and the deception and the corruption and the wounding and the unconscious behaviors that have driven pain and suffering on the planet for so long. As the awakening intensifies, so must all of the purging process that comes with that. Because in order to awaken, in order to continue to evolve as individuals and as a species, we have to let go of that which has been dense and holding us in lower states of consciousness. Fear, anger, shame, guilt, bitterness, these lower vibrational emotions, they all must bubble up to the surface, which is what they're doing now, in order to be seen, in order to be witnessed consciously with the conscious mind, because they're stored in the unconscious. We have to consciously witness them, consciously meet them with awareness, and then allow them to be released, to be transmuted. And this is not an easy process, but of course, the gift of that, the reward of that, is that every single time we move through this process of death, of dying, of purging, and then we're reborn in some way, we move closer to our divine truth. We move closer to our soul purpose, our soul mission, to more joy, to more fulfillment, to more peace, to more love. And that's why we're here, to seed that on the planet, to seed it far and wide until it touches every single corner of Earth. That's why we're here. The words that come to mind as I finish this video are, everything you most desire heartfelt desire I'm talking about. Everything you most desire is on the other side of everything you most fear. So, light workers, I encourage you to keep the faith now, have courage, do what you need to do to feel safe to move through the dense emotions and experiences that are arising for us all at the moment. If that means finding a trained therapist to work with, or a circle of some kind, or a coach, a mentor, a guide, finding someone or somewhere that can hold space for you is going to be really important for you to feel safe enough to move through the residual pain and trauma. And then on the other side of that is your next level. So I'm sending you lots of love at this time. If you're not already subscribed, please do. And come and find me on Instagram @UndefinedLife. I look forward to connecting with you again really soon.